Brought to you courtesy Ibis Premium Grade Flour. Introducing the new look of inspiration. Say hello to the all-new Ibis Baker's Flour, specially crafted for your finest creations and home baking moments. Now alongside your trusted Ibis all-purpose flour, both with a fresh new look. Plus, we're excited to introduce a brand new 5 kilogram size, more of the quality you love. Whether you're kneading, mixing or creating, do it with a brand that brings tradition to your table. Ibis, a tradition of excellence.
At Extra Foods, we care for you. That's why we always have the widest variety, the best prices, spacious aisles of total convenience, plus clean, safe surroundings. Let us care for you. Extra Foods, always extra for less.
Welcome back to The Leaders Who Built Our Nation, a 5-part podcast series from the Trinidad Express newspapers. I'm Dominic Kalipersad. In episode 2, we delve into a decade of significant change, a period that tested the resilience of our young democracy. Today, we examine the leadership of George Chambers and A.N.R. Robinson. From quiet steadiness to dramatic defiance, this was a chapter of both continuity and upheaval.
It is very difficult to give you my impressions of the highlights of the visit, because to do that would be to give some indication of a preference for one village over another. Every village had its own peculiar personality. Every village had its own character. Every village had its own spokesman, very articulate and jealously guarding his own village boundaries. It was very difficult. I would say, however, that yesterday afternoon there was a school children's rally at the Northeastern College. And I was thrilled by the atmosphere. And I left there with a good feeling that this country will never be lost if we continue to produce children like the children I saw in Northeastern College.
George Michael Chambers was born in Port-of-Spain, Trinidad in the year 1928, the first in a family of 3 boys and 2 girls. He spent his early years at 12 Jackson Place with his grandmother Catherine, who was of Martinican descent. Beginning his education at Nelson Street Boys RC School, he went on to Berks College and Osmond High School.
Joining me is cultural icon, comedian and social commentator Errol Fabien, a man who lived through this era and observed and interpreted it through the lens of media and performance. Errol, welcome.
Thank you, Dominic. Thanks for having me. I did live through that time.
Yes, you did. What is your perception of how George Chambers entered into that office?
Boy, listen to me. Well, first on the comedy side, right? I mean, there was a lot to say about George that was funny and was unwarranted. He was a very steady prime minister. But I think the fact that it was early post-colonial time and he didn't have a degree and all these things didn't augur well for the general public and even from people within his party. But George was a very stable. He had us confident. The ship continued to sail, and it was a very trying economic time. It was a declining economic time. And George Chambers, without any flair, but with his technocrat way, he served before Prime Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Housing, Ministry of National Security. He understood how this thing worked. So I think he brought all of that to bear as a Prime Minister.
But he came under the shadow of a man of...
A giant.
A giant.
A giant.
Did you think that this affected how he performed or how he was perceived?
Absolutely how he was perceived. But he put his head down and did what he went in there to do. But the perception was that we would fail, he is weak. He lacked flair and, he wasn't a big dramatic guy. But he got the job done. He really did.
But still, you and others found him to be comedic fodder.
Yeah.
And sang the song of Chambers Dunsey and so on.
They say you used to put on deodorant like this. And they say his teacup had this side up.
Do you think it is likely you could have been unfair to him?
Absolutely. But comedy is not about being fair. It's not. But I think the whole country was unfair to George Chambers. He did us well, he did us proud, and he got the job done.
So what do you know about his education and social policy during that time?
Well, his education, he did, if I remember, like a general education correspondence course. And that's what he did. So after Eric Williams, such a prolific academic, George was not even his shadow academically. But like I said, because of the ministries George worked in, he understood and he knew how the thing worked and understand the governance structure. And he really kept the place stable. That's the word that keep coming to my mind for George Chambers, because people thought it was all for naught when Eric went. When Eric passed, they thought it was the end. But George Chambers stood up. He stepped up to the plate and he got the job done.
I knew George Chambers in two capacities. One as a minister and the other as the Prime Minister. But in either capacity, I remember him as a no-nonsense person, very focused, very demanding, and very to the point. And consequently, those of us who worked closely with him, we knew that personality that we had to deal with. We knew the characteristics, and so we tried our best not to fail him.
George worked at Hamel-Smith & Company before he embarked on his political journey. In 1956, he married Juliana Jacobs. They resided at St. Augustine with their daughter, Andrea.
My fondest memories is that he had a very, very high sense of humor. And with all my brothers, they are clowns. So, I remember, very, very fun times with them, although he was always the quiet one.
After joining the People's National Movement in 1956, Chambers was elected to Parliament as member for St. Anne's East. This representation continued through the elections of 1971, 1976 and 1981. He held many portfolios as Minister of Finance, Public Utilities, Housing, National Security, Education, Planning, Industry, Commerce and Agriculture.
His behavior is a template for the behavior of representatives in Parliament. He mixed easily with his constituents. He was literally at their beck and call. And within cabinet and so on, wherever there was an opportunity for any one of his constituents, he would take advantage of it and pass it on to them.
Do you think the country had any idea how he came to be selected as Prime Minister?
I don't think anybody knows that, or few people know that. And I think if you know, you should say the story. Because I got a version.
Well, let's hear what you heard.
I hear that the then president, Ellis Clark, was standing or making a decision with three people in the room, Kamaluddin Mohammed. I think the other person was John Donaldson and Chambers. And
Errol Fabien.
Errol Fabien. So they were saying, he was saying, boss, it's time to put an Indian as prime minister, you know. And the next one was making his lobby too. And Chambers didn't say anything. And the president said, well, you know what? You be prime minister. And he said, okay, boss. Just do it.
I think that's the story I heard.
That's pretty much what I heard.
I more or less knew, first of all, that Mr. Chambers didn't seek to be prime minister. I know that he was chosen after the president did what he thought was the proper consultations with various people and various institutions. And if you check your records, you'll see that within a couple of minutes of President Clark's announcement of the Prime Minister's passing and his appointment of a new Prime Minister, to wit, Mr. Chambers, all the heads of all the departments of the security in Trinidad and Tobago appeared on television and gave their wholehearted support.
Coming on the heels of Eric Williams was a challenge. I mean, you know, his shoes to fill. They were big shoes. But, you know, I think George did what he could best, you know, in his own quiet way, you know, and there was an advantage in a sense because not having that, you know, as Trinidadians, we want this, you know, have a university education, but not having that, and with all the criticisms, I think he listened.
If you were to meet him today,
I would love to meet him.
What would you say to him?
I would say to him how grateful I am that he was the man he was, because he also allowed the jackass to bray, because he wasn't deaf to the fun everybody was making of him in Calypso and otherwise. And it didn't deter him, it didn't distract him. He stood as a man and he did what he had to do. And I think all Trinbagonians should say thank you to George Chambers, because that was not an easy transition. Things could have gone very wrong in the country at the time.
When we return, we will examine the rise of the National Alliance for Reconstruction and the leadership of A.N.R. Robinson.
Introducing the new look of inspiration. Say hello to the all-new Ibis Baker's Flour, specially crafted for your finest creations and home baking moments. Now alongside your trusted Ibis all-purpose flour, both with a fresh new look. Plus, we're excited to introduce a brand new 5 kilogram size, more of the quality you love. Whether you're kneading, mixing or creating, do it with a brand that brings tradition to your table. Ibis, a tradition of excellence.
At Extra Foods, we care for you. That's why we always have the widest varieties, the best prices, spacious aisles of total convenience, plus clean, safe surroundings. Let us care for you. Extra Foods, always extra for less.
In 1986, the N.R., led by A.N.R. Robinson, swept into power with a landslide victory.
On December 15, 1986, the people of Trinidad and Tobago voted a new government into office. They chose Arthur Raymond Napoleon Robinson as their new leader. For a man who had fought the People's National Movement for nearly 3 decades from inside and out, Robinson's time had arrived.
I have complete confidence in our people and in our future. However hard the problems may be, however difficult the road may be, I know we have what it takes to overcome.
For the outgoing Prime Minister George Chambers, it was a most humiliating moment. His party had governed for 30 years. Now, under his leadership, the party had suffered an embarrassing defeat, and with it went his own constituency.
I have accepted without reservation these results as the exercise of the democratic will of the people. It is certainly to our credit as a nation that the transfer of power can take place peacefully and in orderly fashion.
For the people, it was what they called an act of liberation few thought possible. A whole generation had known no other governing party, and in those 30 years that the PNM held power, the party had somehow grown to believe that it owned the country, the people, and the resources.
I, Arthur Napoleon Raymond Robinson, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago.
Robinson, as the country's new leader, was embarking on a challenge many would not have accepted.
What do you remember about Robinson's leadership style?
Very often, I myself have uttered that he was the best prime minister we ever had. He had some very difficult decisions to make, and he felt as though he was a no-compromise kind of prime minister. It's black or it's white. It was under his stewardship that the dollar was floated, that we stopped importing fruit, that we also had some nice things where he had the national cleanup campaign when they just got into office. But the racial divide affected his governance also, because 2 years in or so, the ULF moved out of government, you know, and it was a weird coalition because it was the A.N.R, the DAC, and the ULF, I think, were the parties that came together. And it felt as though the country came together, especially in that first year. It was so exciting, you know, it was very exciting. There was a sense of patriotism very, very much in the country at the time. But Robinson was a very disciplined man.
So how did his leadership impact the cultural, education, and civic life of the country?
I think in a positive way, because we developed, coming out of George Chambers, coming out of that reign, Robinson put the spotlight on us as Trinidad and Tobago, especially with some of those fiscal measures that he made. It forced us to appreciate our fruit. It forced us to look at ourselves. It brought about the civic mindedness. I think we were really moving into something positive as a nation at the time.
On July 27, 1990, the unimaginable happened. A radical religious group, the Jamaat al-Muslimin, stormed the Red House and held the government hostage.
This is Trinidad and Tobago Television. We are being allowed to make another news bulletin. The Imam Abu Bakr wants you to know that the police headquarters in downtown Port-of-Spain has been gutted by fire. They are still in control of TTT. The staffers here are unharmed.
At 6 p.m. this afternoon, the government of Trinidad and Tobago was overthrown. The Prime Minister and members of the cabinet are under arrest. We are asking everybody to remain calm. The revolutionary forces are commanded to control the streets.
See, I have to come back to the PNM here, and I'm going to give myself some liberty here. That, remember, Robbie was a PNM minister. He was our Minister of Finance. He was our Minister of Home Affairs. He was a PNM. And he break ranks, and PNM don't like when you break ranks. So the same mischief against Chambers, which I'm sure, and I know originated in the very party, they were out to get Robinson. And then Pandy, who had to leave, It's like Robinson had two oppositions, although only one was sitting in the parliament, the PNM. But he came under fierce opposition, and it made his governance, they stained his governance, I think. And that coup was like the real blemish on our history and on his term. There was no way he could have won the election after that.
But I see you aligning his unpopularity within that political sphere and the event of 1990. Are you suggesting that Abu Bakr exploited an opportunity?
I think he was encouraged so to do. Well, I don't think Abu Bakr on his own came up with this. I think he get basket from in the PNM, and I think he get basket from other places. I don't think, because on the day, history has it, that our then opposition leader was in Parliament in the morning, but not in the afternoon. History has it that a man who became Attorney General subsequently was in another country with no particular business. It appears as though significant people knew what was going to happen in the country.
Now, it has been said, but not very seriously, that I should have appointed a commission of inquiry at that time, that the Abu Bakr adventure took place, 1990. May I say positively that it would have been most unwise to attempt to appoint any commission of inquiry, as indeed events have shown very clearly. We had both the PNM and the Pandey faction opposed to the A.N.R, which means a large section of the population was still opposed. And they, both Pandey and Manning, were at the time very, very vigorously opposed. I think their reaction to what took place, I think, is now well known. It has been said so many times. I don't need to repeat it. I felt it would be foolish to attempt. Even the selection of members to conduct the inquiry would have been vigorously opposed, adding to the greater uncertainty and disturbance in the country. Persons who were involved in promoting the attempt at the coup would not have their position, their acts exposed, so they would add to the disturbance. Trinidad and Tobago could have erupted into civil war if we had appointed a commission of inquiry to obtain the truth at that time.
Where were you?
I was in Parliament.
And you saw the atrocities happened in there.
Of course.
Why do you think you were chosen by the insurrectionists as the person they would wish to be interim Prime Minister?
I never knew why. I never knew why, but I knew they were looking to change the government and they wanted a transition government. And I don't know why they may have asked me, but I took a part in the so-called negotiations that took place with respect to the attempt to violently take over the government. But I don't think that had an effect on it. I really don't understand why. I think they were looking for a symbol of unity. This is in reflection.
Now, one has read that it was John Humphrey who first mooted the idea of an amnesty. When that was mooted, how did you all follow through on that?
You're correct. I was there, and I invited John Humphrey to join into the discussion at that moment in July 27th, and I was somewhat astonished that he would make that request. I did not think that the request had any legal rationale or real authority. In fact, the entire agreement that was mooted thereafter did not have, in my view, a legal authority. And the story is long on that issue, and the fact that it was eventually dismissed as being legitimate, although the perpetrators were freed in the process, is something that has perplexed me ever since.
So the amnesty was a bluff?
It was an instrument that was used to diffuse a strong, violent situation. It wasn't a bluff. It was an important instrument that brought the people to start the process by which, in fact, the situation was diffused.
Introducing the new look of inspiration. Say hello to the all-new Ibis Baker's Flour, specially crafted for your finest creations and home baking moments. Now alongside your trusted Ibis all-purpose flour, both with a fresh new look. Plus, we're excited to introduce a brand new 5 kilogram size, more of the quality you love. Whether you're kneading, mixing or creating, do it with a brand that brings tradition to your table. Ibis, a tradition of excellence.
At Extra Foods, we care for you. That's why we always have the widest varieties, the best prices, spacious aisles of total convenience, plus clean, safe surroundings. Let us care for you. Extra Foods, always extra for less.
During this period, our head of state was President Ellis Clark, followed in 1987 by Noor Hassan Ali, the nation's first Indo-Trinidadian and Muslim president. His humility, dignity, and deep respect for office made him one of the most beloved national figures.
In my addresses, I always use the phrase human conscience. Once this fellow conscience is inside you, you cannot ignore him. He won't let you rest. He just won't let you. The words of Noor Hassan Ali, second President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, gives an inside view of a man for whom moral and ethical values were the very principles of life. Indeed, President Hassan Ali was identified as someone who meant what he said, who commanded respect from all with whom he interacted, and who made decisions based on his human conscience. His was a strong, quiet voice, but his dignity and humility outshone all his other remarkable qualities.
So you spoke about you were part of negotiations. What was that process of negotiations like? Did you quarrel with one another? Were you aggressive? Were the Jamaat people aggressive? Were you respectful for one another? In the midst of a crisis like that, how do you negotiate?
Well, we did not negotiate. What we were doing is we found ourselves in a situation that people were holding us at ransom with guns at our head. And we had a way to remove that tension. So what we did was to have a dialogue of some sort with our captors to say what you would like to achieve. We would like to see if we could find a way for you without, of course, ceding in our minds the right for us to do what our responsibilities were. So it wasn't a negotiation in the sense in which one defined a negotiation. It was done with our hands tied, and it was done while we were on the floor, all of us. It was done at the time when when Mr. A.N.R. Robinson was shot. It was the time when our Attorney General, Mr. Richardson, was also being shot. So it wasn't a negotiation in which we have defined negotiation, but it was an intense moment to diffuse the situation, to prevent it from becoming worse. And an assault on Parliament was imminent during that night and subsequently. And we had to ensure that that assault did not take place, and if it were to take place, it would take place with the minimum disruption of life. That was not possible. So therefore, it was really a set of events that took place over that 6 days. I could speak about that at length, but that is another issue. But it was not a negotiation.
What was the exact trigger that caused them to pull the trigger to shoot him?
Well, I think he was being defiant in acceding to any demands on their part, which they were first making to him. And in that defiance, they felt that, and Mr. Robinson, as you well know, was a man of great defiance in his whole political career. So he was just acting to himself. And I think the perception was that he was too defiant.
Because he had been rumored to be, as Prime Minister, not very much of a team player, that he wanted things, it was either his way or the highway. Is that in keeping with the defiant spirit of Mr. Robinson?
He was somewhat like you. He was stern. And in my interviews with you during our period in public life, you were always a stern interviewer, never allowing anyone to get away with anything that they ought not to get away with. People interpret that differently. I interpreted that positively.
So you said you don't hold to the view that people generally do, that it was because of the circumstances of the country at the time that the coup happened, and not necessarily because, I'm presuming, of the austerity measures that the A.N.R. had to take. And that Abu Bakr was an egotistical man. He acted on ego. Expand on that for me.
Well, it was not only ego. Ego is part of an ambition. I think if you understand his history as a man who was in the police service for some time, he may have harbored a desire one day to overthrow a government.
Why? Why would he suddenly harbor this desire to overthrow a government?
He probably was a very determined man. I don't know him in a personal sense. And he probably had that desire then.
But he probably was a man who got fed up at broken promises over the land at Mucurapo, that fueled by the harsh measures, the harsh experiences of the people of the country at the time. Or did he capitalize on that?
He capitalized on it.
So you ignore the fact that he got the promise for the land at Mucurapo?
No, I don't think those matters led to the gravity of the situation. The response to resolving that issue was not to overthrow the government. The response was to negotiate a solution, which we were doing at the time. Dr. Brinzi Samaru was then the Minister of Lands and Agriculture, was involved in that process. So, and the Attorney General too, you asked about him earlier, they were involved in that process. I was aware of that. So you don't decide that you'll overthrow a government and exercise an act of treason if you disagree with the government's speed with which it's resolving an issue. It's not rational. There has to be something beyond that motivated such an individual.
Now, during that unfortunate incident, Mr. Robinson was brutalized and shot, and he famously said, attack them with full force. How do you view the character of the man to have gone through that torture and still stand up?
So I saw it as the same guy who came into office in 86. Disciplined, black and white. He would not negotiate with a terrorist. That's not the man he is. He is a man who I believe, will take a bullet for our country. Well, he did. But I think that's the kind of leader that Robinson was. I'm also that kind of guy. I will take a bullet for Trinidad and Tobago.
So what did his response in that moment say about him?
It said that the country was not for sale. You cannot bully us. You cannot force your way into office here. And that he said, over my dead body. That's what he said. Because if we had attacked with full force, he would have been a casualty in that situation. So he was pretty much telling them, over my dead body, this will happen. So get them, attack them, move on them. Don't study what's going to happen to me. He was talking on behalf of the other guys in the parliament also. But it was a very powerful and profound thing to say.
And in the days
and fearless thing.
And in the days and weeks after?
In the days and weeks after, Dominic, Trinidad and Tobago, but more so Trinidad, went through a very sad time. For me personally, it was very difficult because I was trapped outside of the country and couldn't come home. And my wife and 3 children were in Belmont and I couldn't get to them. All the looting was happening, different things was going on. And I managed to get a call and asked them to go down to Point Fortin, where they did go, where it was a different kind of energy there. But it was lawlessness, a lot of lawlessness.
Our armchair analysts tend to associate 1990 with the loss of innocence and the beginning of the spike in crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Do you share that view?
I share that view. The second part of it at any rate, because guns arrived in the country that were not for our armed services, you know, and people got a sort of brazenness, a sort of boldness. They were emboldened to do things that were not law-abiding things, to break laws. I would agree with that.
Patricia Jean Nee Rollins, a top specialist in economics in Trinidad and Tobago, won over A.N.R's heart. They were married and together they have a son David and a daughter Anne Margaret.
My wife has been an essential part of my life. And may I say, an essential part of the independence of our country of Trinidad and Tobago.
Serving not only his country but the international community with determination and purpose, A.N.R. Robinson holds firmly to the belief that there is a divinity that shapes our end.
I would like to be remembered as a leader who was prepared to sacrifice his life for the benefit of his country.
A man of tremendous faith, a man who has lived by example. A.N.R. Robinson encourages the people as they cope with the challenges of democracy and independence in their twin island republic.
So as you reflect, what would you say would be his legacy?
Mr. Robinson? Wow. For me, because I think his legacy is fractured because of what happened in 1990. But for me, Arthur Napoleon Raymond Robinson is still the best prime minister we've ever had. And I think his policies saved us, and we should be still thanking him today. I think Arthur Napoleon Raymond Robinson's work to establish the CCJ and other things that he did with respect to law internationally, I think that will redound to our national legacy, not just his.
Errol Fabien, commentator.
Am I a commentator?
Yep. That's what you are today.
Okay, very well. Well, I must sit properly then.
Thank you for sharing your views.
Yes, you're very welcome. It was good. Thanks for inviting me, Dominic.
Introducing the new look of inspiration. Say hello to the all-new Ibis Baker's Flour, specially crafted for your finest creations and home baking moments. Now alongside your trusted Ibis all-purpose flour, both with a fresh new look. Plus, we're excited to introduce a brand new 5 kilogram size, more of the quality you love. Whether you're kneading, mixing or creating, do it with a brand that brings tradition to your table. Ibis, a tradition of excellence.
At Extra Foods, we care for you. That's why we always have the widest varieties, the best prices, spacious aisles of total convenience, plus clean, safe surroundings. Let us care for you. Extra Foods, always extra for less.
In episode 3, we examine the return of the PNM under Patrick Manning and the historic premiership of Basdeo Panday. Join me, Dominic Kalipersad, next time on The Leaders Who Built Our Nation.